Simplifying it a bit for you, can in self-defense for a brief period of time. So basically that's it. Security Council has to decide. And in this Iraq war, in contrast with the first one 10 years ago, Security Council had not decided that the force could be used. On the contrary, in the last resolutions, they said very specifically, go out and search, see if there are weapons of mass destruction, and then report back. Then we'll decide. Meanwhile, we're warning Iraq that we intend to hold them accountable for their promises to disarm, etc., etc. And when we get the report back, then we will decide what's to be done. The United States jumped the gun. I said, oh, no, we're not taking any chances on that. Hit them now. In my considered judgment, shared by very many competent lawyers, top lawyers in the business, to which there is a dissenting view, that is the supreme crime of aggression. Henry King has mentioned it briefly. I'll go into it a bit further. Aggression is the supreme international crime because, as was pointed out in the judgment, it includes all the other crimes. And I'll tell you something else as a war crimes investigator. You'll never have a war without atrocities. I don't care what regulations are followed or enacted. We had the situation in Vietnam where a GI would come into a little village and a child would come out and the GI would give him a hug and give him a candy bar and the kid would pull the pin on the hand grenade and blow him up. I guarantee you, under those circumstances, every kid in that village is dead and the village is burned to the ground. That's what's going to happen. And my answer to that is the only way to prevent war crimes, and that's what I'm trying to do for 50 years, and the only way to protect our service people is to avoid war. My slogan is, law is better than war. This is the law of society. If you agree with that slogan, then I think you have an obligation to do everything you can to uphold the law which deals with this subject and to not glorify the war. I'm not saying you don't glorify the soldiers who die. I'm trying to protect the lives of the soldiers who die. I don't want them to die, men and women. The only way I know, the best way I know, is to prevent war. Now, I know that sounds like it can't be done, you know. But let me come back to the point of truth. A couple of months ago, there was published the Downing Street papers in the London Times. I picked them up, had the text, sent it out on my website to a number of people. And the Downing Street papers reported, in a top secret report, of top people in Great Britain, Prime Minister Tony Blair, head of his intelligence, Secretary of State, head of all the military services, what to do. It was just before the war broke out in Iraq. What to do, what's the situation? And the report came back that they had met in Washington with our top people, with the President, Secretary of Defense, and the Americans were determined to go to war. They had made up their mind 2 years before, it was before 9/11, that they were going to get rid of Saddam Hussein by force. That's the only way to do it, one way or the other. And the British had taken the position, you can't do that. You can't have regime change just like that. It's illegal. It's aggression. It's a crime of aggression. Well, let's figure out some better way. And so they said the Americans came up with another theory, that there are weapons of mass destruction. They're going to attack us. Under the UN Charter, if you are subject to armed attack by an enemy, you can defend yourself until such time as the Security Council can step in, providing you report to the Security Council, etc. So the argument was, well, the Americans are cooking up this theory of weapons of mass destruction. And the British gentlemen on the highest level saying, hey, can we prove that? And someone was saying, I don't think so. And another one comes back and he says, look, I just met with all the lawyers in Washington. They're good people. And they are good people. And they say, look, we've got a reasonable grounds for doing this and we're going to do it. So they said, okay, well, we've got to get it through to Parliament too. So they give a report to the Parliament. There is reasonable basis for proceeding no mention made of all the doubts which are expressed in this secret document, which you can find on my website if you can't find it on your own. A lady who represented the United Kingdom at the United Nations for many years, and whom I knew quite well, called Elizabeth Wilmshurst. She was their deputy legal advisor to the Foreign Ministry, which is responsible for questions of aggression. She was quite an expert on aggression, on which I had written 2 large volumes and dozens of articles. And she was always on the other side. You know, you've got to have a war, otherwise there's no aggression. You have to have a declaration of war and so on. And she did not, by no means would you consider Elizabeth Wilmshurst a radical or an innovative thinker. She was a very conservative, straight, first-class British lawyer working as her career as a British civil servant. She sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry, a copy of which I have, saying, I'm very sorry, I'm very close to retiring age now, but I cannot serve a government which is engaging in the crime of aggression. That's a quote, the crime of aggression. I must resign. Elizabeth Wilmshurst. What do you do? As a lawyer, I say everyone is presumed innocent until found guilty in a court of law. We did that to Goebbels and to Goering, and everybody's entitled to that. I suggested that we insist upon access to the information in the United States on this subject. They have minutes of the meetings with the British. They have minutes of the internal meetings. Is it something to protect the national interest that they keep this from the public? Is it national security that's at stake or job security? I think as a bar association, and I'm talking to you now as a lawyer to the bar association, I think you have a duty to insist that the government reveal the basis on which they went to war and reach a determination and recommendation as to whether it was legal. You may find them innocent. You may find that you're going to disregard the law. You say the charter doesn't work, the heck with it. We have a representative at the United Nations now, John Bolton, protege of Jesse Helms, who said the International Criminal Court would come into existence over his dead body, and I quote. And I think we have a duty as lawyers to get to the truth, to see the record, to see whether they have decided to bypass the law, which I think is very dangerous. Because, as Jackson pointed out in his opening day, and was quoted here by Henry King, to pass these defendants a poisoned chalice is to put it to our own lips as well. The law must apply equally to everyone, or as Telford Taylor would say, the law is not a one-way street. If we now are prepared to tear up the UN Charter and let every nation decide for itself when it thinks it's threatened by another one, and can therefore go to war and kill them all, including their children, which we do in nuclear bombing today, what kind of a world will we have? What kind of world will you have? I'm not worried about my world, and that's behind me. What about you and your children and your grandchildren? Don't you have an obligation to try to get to the truth? Get to the truth. My feeling is if the law is defective as it is, and all the courts have been created since then, all have faults. Of course they have faults. They have to be improved, corrected. Imagine if we had a police department here and there were some corrupt policemen and some of the judges were corrupt and some of the laws were ambiguous. Would you say we are not bound by them? Throw them out? What kind of a world would you have? What you have to do is to improve them. You point to the defects, and there are many, and I'm perfectly aware of them. I've written about many of them. And then you go forward from there. Now,